So, welcome to Essential Ingredients. I'm Justine Reicher, and with me today is Neka Pasquale, and she's the founder of Urban Remedy. And I'm super excited to have you here. You're someone that's local, inspirational, and built a business that I can't wait to learn about as you've grown. And it's so important to me because I came from New York and I couldn't find anything. And when I found you, I kind of felt like I was home again. So, welcome, Neka.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to
Oh,
talk to
it's
you.
my pleasure. I love to also just connect with other local people that are building good businesses, better for you food options and accessibility for people here in the local area. But equally, that being said, as we learn more about this and we'll get into it, see how you've grown outside the local Marin or Bay Area. So, for those not familiar, can you maybe just give a little overview of Urban Remedy?
Yeah. So Urban Remedy is a company that I founded. God, it's been like 13 years, which is so crazy. And as we were just talking about privately, I'm an acupuncturist. So my background is in Chinese medicine, and I had a practice for many years, over a decade. And that's where I kind of really got into food as medicine and really looking at how diet impacts, our overall health. And when I had my practice, I kind of dove deep into like detoxification and really kind of looking at our farming system and where food comes from and how it's grown and how it affects our body and pesticides and all that kind of stuff. And so I just was so excited about all of it. And it was so cool for me when I was in school because I was like, wow, you can, like, everything has a medicinal quality to it. So like you could, everything that you eat or make, you could really think of it like, what does this do to my body? Or not in a way that's like stressful or pressured, but just really understand how food is just like, we're so, Chinese medicine is based in we are nature and nature is us. So really looking at food in the same way and how we're connected, how eating local and organic is really important, not just for us, but for our environment. And the healthier we are, the healthier our environments are. So just kind of like bridging that all together. And then I started doing retreats with my patients that had different chronic illnesses or people that just wanted to lose weight or just feel better. And that's kind of honestly really how Urban Remedy was born. People just started feeling so good in such a short amount of time. And I started people were like, I can't make the food. It doesn't taste as good as when you make it. And can you just make it for me? And then I love cooking. And so I started making snacks and people just bought those like crazy. And then I thought I was just going to open my first store in Santa Fe. That was in like 2011 or 12. And I really thought this is going to be just kind of like a niche thing for people like me that like to eat this way. And I mean, I just couldn't believe it. I mean, it just went gangbusters right when we opened the door. And there was nothing else really like it at that point. There was maybe like Jamba Juice at that point. And so, anyways, it was a very
I don't feel like Jamba Juice is the same as Urban Remedy.
No. Just from like a juice perspective. Like if you wanted a juice, there wasn't like a lot of little juice shops around, right? Like if I wanted wheatgrass juice, like if I was in New York or something, we were just talking about New York, like I would know that I could get like a wheatgrass shot when I went to Jamba Juice, I mean, it was definitely like a higher sugar, different kind of smoothie thing. But there wasn't a lot of juice shops, and I also did food. And so, yeah, it's just been such a crazy experience. Cause like I said, I never really wrote up a business plan. I was like, oh, I want this to be a national company. I just thought this is going to be so fun to do in Marin where I live. And a lot of people in the beginning were like, good luck. Like, oh, your location's good. And, I don't know. But people, it was something that people really wanted and were craving. And so we grew, 100% year over year for many years. And so it felt like when I look back at that time, I'm like, God, my life was so crazy because I was just, I was an acupuncturist. So I was just figuring out like, how do you procure ingredients? Where do you store bottles? How do you ship? How do you, all of these things. And so I made so many mistakes but it was so fun and I'm a really good problem solver. So I was constantly just like figuring it all out. And yeah, it's been a journey.
It sounds like it. And a fun one at that. Super okay, so let's go back to I'm just curious, and I say that because I have a little bit of Chinese medicine experience, and I would not say I have a lot because I don't want to do that. But one of the things that they talk about in Chinese medicine that I learned was all about cooked foods. So I was curious and like heating things up. And so I'm curious, where did that come into your thinking, and how does that play a role, if any? And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, yes. That I've had actually quite a few people ask me that question because in Chinese medicine, like there's things like you never drink ice cold water, right? It's not good for your spleen. So your spleen is like your main digestive organ. So when you eat food, your spleen digests the food, it transforms and transports it into blood, into energy, into chi, into like life force. And so in Chinese medicine, they say don't eat too many cold foods. And so, in my own kind of journey, in my own health journey, when I was in acupuncture school, I actually developed PCOS and and I was like stressed out and I was eating just like not a very healthy diet, and they were like, okay, let's put you on this medication. And I was like, I'm going to do some research. Let me kind of look into this. And I said, just give me like 6 months. And so I started juicing. I started eating a raw food diet, but there's a way to do a raw food diet where you're not eating all cold food, like ice cream cold out of the fridge, right? So every food, as you know, has a taste, a temperature, and a meridian associated with it. So when you look at the qualities of any individual ingredient, they can be cold, cooling, warm, hot. Really, that's kind of the basic. And so even if you're eating foods that are not well cooked, they can still be warming and support spleen function, right? So if you look at something like ginger, you could eat it fresh. It's hot, it's warm, right? When you heat it up, when you cook with it, it actually is hotter. And so there are a lot of ingredients that are warming. And so I've really tried to take that kind of philosophy and balance because also you have to understand that Chinese medicine, when they were talking about food and writing about it, right, was thousands of years ago in a different climate where people were, different people had a really different constitution at that point in time. And so if you live, let's say, in Antarctica, right, and you're living in a really cold, damp environment, yeah, you do not want to be eating raw cold food at all. You want to be eating soups and broths and stews and things that are going to balance out your environment. So I always say, look at your environment where you live and the season that that environment is in, and then you eat according to that. And so, but there's things that are always good for you. You know what I mean? Like green foods are always good for your liver, right? So a lot of green foods tend to be slightly cooling, but our livers, especially in this day and age, tend to be like stuck and hot. And so green foods are really good at cooling the liver, soothing the liver, and helping the liver be able to do its job better. So, in the summertime, you might eat more like salads and drink more green juices because it's likely to be hotter wherever you are. Um, but if it's wintertime and it's cold and you could still have liver qi congestion. And so you could still eat salads. You could slightly warm them. I mean, we have directions on a bunch of our salads about warming. You could also take a salad out and just not eat it cold out of the fridge. Just let it sit for like 45 minutes and it gets to room temperature and then it's not as cold. Or if you're choosing juices, you can choose juice with like turmeric or ginger or like cayenne or something spicy in it, because when you're drinking it and it's warming, then it's supporting that spleen stomach function. And you could look at like all foods in that way,
So many things. And I love the way you break it down because for people like me that only got half an education in Chinese medicine,
Yeah.
I go that next step and I was so curious. And I'm like, okay, I want to know more because this makes so much sense. And I'm not sure how to organize the food and also connect it to the dots, right? So for me, that was, I thought, really something interesting to ask you. But I do want to go back to the beginning for those tuning in that are just really inspired by what you've built and how you've built it. And just, sort of talk a little bit about that. I mean, my understanding is you went from doing acupuncture to this. So as an acupuncturist, oftentimes people are entrepreneurs. So, were you an entrepreneur then, or was this your first endeavor?
I would say I would say I'm kind of an entrepreneur at heart because my mom had her own business when I was growing up, and same with my dad. They never had jobs. Same with my grandparents. And so I think, like, when I look, that's a great question that I have never really thought about. But when I look back at my acupuncture practice, I started my practice. It takes, a good year and a half to really get in your flow and get people coming. And probably when I was like 3 years into my practice, I was very busy. I was just telling my boyfriend, I forgot. I'm like, I used to have 3 treatment rooms. And I used to, at my busiest parts of the day, be treating 3 people at the same time and trying to manage, like, putting needles in one person, talking to another person, when do you blah, blah, blah. Like, how do you do that? And so I was very busy, and maybe, like, in retrospect, I did that so I could squeeze in as many people as I could, right? Because when you're a practitioner, your time is everything, right? Because you can't, that's a different thing when you have your own business. It's like when you have to show up and be there and you're giving the service. And so over time, as I got more interested and learned more about functional medicine and detoxification, I wanted to, like, incorporate that into my practice. And that is when I started doing retreats. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to get this together. I'm going to get like 10 to, probably like 13 people. There's men and women. I'm going to take everybody out. We started at Stinson Beach, and there was this huge house there that I used to rent. And, it had, like, I don't know, 11 bedrooms or something. And I just brought everybody there, and I'm like, all right, we're going to do yoga, meditation, like infrared sauna, um, obviously juicing, all live raw food at that point. And let's just see what happens, because these are things that I found to be really helpful for people. And it was just so incredible. People felt so much better after. And so that was probably like my entrepreneurial spirit of, like, well, let's try this. And it's a really cool way to do something different, but also do what I incorporate, like, all the things I love. I love food so much. I can make, and I made, like, when I first started, I should have had pictures. I mean, I do have pictures of, like, I would just make the most beautiful food. Like, everything that I would plate was just like so colorful and just like vibrant. And I would do like all the different colors of the rainbow. And it was so fun and creative for me during that time to be able to do that. And then I just started doing that like quarterly. And then people kept wanting the food and wanting the juice. And that's really, really how Urban Remedy started. So yes, I would say, and there's kind of a funny story. Right when I started doing the juicing, I had like one person working for me, and we would deliver people, mostly my patients, juices. All right. It was like once or twice a week. And somebody called me from Guilt. I don't know if you remember Guilt. It was like a shopping platform. And, hey, we heard about what you're doing, and can you offer like a juice cleanse to people in San Francisco? And I was like, oh, that sounds so cool. Sure. But I didn't even really know much about what it was, really. And I was like, yeah, sure. And so I had no website. I had no, like, nothing. Maybe I actually did have like a website that was just like Urban Remedy with a phone number or something. And I remember one day, and I was pregnant at this point, and my phone started ringing off the hook. I had forgotten that I said I would do it. It was like a month before. And I was answering the phone, and people were like, oh, I want to schedule my juice order. And then Guilt was like, you guys sold out in like 5 minutes. Do you want to do more? And I was like, yeah, sure. And so that's really when things, like, then people in San Francisco started hearing about what I was doing. And then things started really going gangbusters. And I didn't have the infrastructure at that point to understand how to, like, really, like, have a back end system that tracks all the orders, and, have people sign up online. And so I literally had a notebook, and I was writing people's names down and their addresses. And then I was reading the sheet, and people would call me and be like, I need my delivery. And yeah, so that's kind of how the whole Urban Remedy thing came to be.
I love that. It's so organic and it's so authentic. And I feel like I'm an entrepreneur too. And I feel like, as you said, you like to solve problems. Me too. So it really resonates with me. And I'm thinking, because we have so many
Yeah.
listeners that are tuning in, I can imagine that they're also thinking the same thing. They're like, wait, I did that too. So, it makes them feel like they're like, okay, I can do this. I can get to the next level. So my question is, how did you go to the next level? Because that's the question for many people, right? It's like that all came together.
Yeah,
You're making it happen, but you've got to go from scrappy to strategic at some point. So, what was that like?
totally. I've really thought about that a lot over the years because I've gone through lots of different periods where there's been times where I'm like, oh my gosh, how are we going to make payroll? Like all of a sudden, like I'm renting a new space or I'm like, I can't catch up with this and, dealing with employee things. And I would say very honestly is like, there's been so many times where I couldn't figure out how to get to the next level. And I would just be like, I would say to myself, you know what, if this is what I meant to be doing, and this is what I meant to do, like it's just going to show up. The answer is going to show up for me because I really don't know how to do it. And I would say with Urban Remedy, consistently the answer has shown up, right? Where there's been so many times, when eventually I hired a CEO and we had a team. And there's just been so many times because it takes a lot of money to grow, right? And so we've had, all these opportunities to like have a kiosk in Whole Foods and prove that out. And like if we could prove that out in California, that we could go to other states. But like all of these things take a lot of money, right? And once you start like shipping nationally, and then you have to have a whole nother distribution system and people to pack the stuff and infrastructure and software to track the orders and all of these things take a lot of money. And so part of the issue with like having, starting the way I did, like if I were to do it over, I probably would have done it different. You know what I mean? But everything is perfect. So I'm grateful for where I am. But I would always tell people now, like when people ask me, like, take as little money as you can as you grow your business. Like even if you grow slower, it doesn't matter because you're going to mess up. Like I have a friend who's starting a little food brand on the side and she's like, wants to have everything perfect. I'm like, no matter how perfect do you think it is, like things are going to mess up and there's going to be an ingredient that you can't source or that's not going to be this or the packaging. And so just know like the first 2 years, you're just going to be learning and making mistakes and it happens to every single person. And that's how you hone in and like get things going in a flow, in a smooth way. And so you have to just know when you start that there's going to be a lot of things kinks that need to be worked out. And so, I would just say that luckily I was like able to be in a flow and grow in the flow the way that it was meant to go. I just sound like I just made a rhyme or something.
There were a million things you could have done differently.
Yeah.
And I know that it's turned out perfectly right now, right? It is how it should be, and you're all excited. But when you think about it intellectually and you think about how you do it differently today, what would you say to those listeners tuning in today?
Yeah, I would say if you're starting something new, a lot of people, first of all, the number one thing is make sure you love what you're doing and you're passionate about it because that's the most critical thing. I really do feel like there's a difference between like really having a passion for what you do and loving it and having an idea that you want to do because you think it's on trend and it's going to make you a lot of money, right? Those are two different things. And not that either is necessarily it's not wrong to do something just to make money, but a lot of times there's just a different energy behind it than when you're like so excited and doing something that you really feel is going to change the world or help people's lives or make you, do something that you're just super passionate about. But I would say that either way, when you're starting your business, it's best to like try to make your own mistakes in the beginning and really figure out your kinks, which is what I was kind of saying before, and take as little money as you need because it does take a lot of money to grow a business. But once you take investment, then there's these expectations on you a lot of times to grow really, really fast. And sometimes to like do things that maybe you don't really want to do or grow in a way you don't really want to grow. And I've been really lucky because my investors are all like very supportive and mission driven aligned, which has been, a great experience for me. But I've talked to so many other women founders that have had different experiences depending on their investor, or how much money you take, right? Because the more of your business that you give away, then the less kind of power you have over those decisions.
Wow. So, and it's interesting because as you know, you're coming up with these ideas, you come up with so many and you want to do them because you get excited.
Yeah.
So, right? I mean, it's exciting. And you're like,
Yeah.
okay, we're growing, we're doing this, we're doing that. And it seems like the path forward, it seems like the way to grow. So for those, you know, folks that are tuning in and are like, okay, so how do I figure that out? How do I figure out where do I want to go next when all these things are coming at me and I'm, you know, I got to make a decision and I'm just getting started and they all look great. But really you kind of got to figure out where you're going to start because as you said, it's really expensive
Yeah.
and you can make a lot of expensive mistakes and that's part of the journey too.
Yeah.
Um, so of course, so I go back to it. What would you recommend to them?
Well, I always think it's good to have good counsel, right? And that means like somebody who can help you really look at like every different way every different opportunity that's in front of you, and then be like, okay, so if you choose to do X, Y, or Z, like how much capital is that going to take? How many employees are you going to need to employ? Like, what is the cost benefit ratio of each of your ideas or each of your opportunities? And really evaluate. I think one of the most important things is like keeping everything as simple as possible, because the easier it is for you to execute, the higher chance of success you're going to have. Things that are very complex burn you out and then take a lot of resources. And so I always think choose the path of least resistance, the path that is going to be the most simplified path that makes sense, at least to start, right? Because nobody wants to be stuck, in something that's very complex, right? And difficult. And even what we do at Whole Foods is, even though we've been doing it for a while and we're good at fresh, what we're doing is really difficult because it's very difficult to scale fresh food that has a short shelf life. And so that's why people don't do it, because it's not easy. And most food companies, that, look at the biggest food companies, their shelf life on their products are years, not days or months. And so it's very difficult. The shorter the shelf life, the more purge you have, right? And so, and who wants to throw away like beautiful organic food? So that's our complexity, is really figuring out that balance between keeping our kiosks full, which sometimes we haven't been, which is still a challenge for us, and but having enough product in there so that when people come to buy the product, it's there and you're not disappointing people. And so it still is a complex business, but without the other pieces, we're able to kind of address our complexity in a more sustainable way.
Yeah, and I think that's so important to share because I remember when we were arranging this, I was like, I can't wait to taste the food because I remember how fresh it was when I would go down to Larkspur in my town. I could walk there with my dogs and get it, and it tasted like I made it this morning. And I was skeptical because I said, okay, how can you produce so much and still have it taste so fresh? It's not going to be the same. Or I was just curious, and it came in, and both my partner and I and my friend, we were tasting it, and we were really impressed with just how fresh it tasted and how it tasted like, it just came like you had just made it in front of me.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that. That's so great, because that's really what we want to do and how we want people to experience our products is like, having, like I just said, right? Fresh food at your fingertips that's ready to eat, that's easy to get, from your local grocery store. And so I'm so happy that you had that experience. And I feel the same way. Like I'll go and get something. I'm like, God, it's so good. I'm so proud of our team. I'm so proud of us for being able to execute in this way where you're not going and getting like a wilty worm salad.
I
Yeah.
love that. So, but I want to go back to a couple of things that you mentioned, just so that we could tap into them for those folks that are building businesses or in the process. So when you went and you found your CEO or you found your counsel that was going to be that person to help you grow, what were some of the things you looked for? For me, I look for the things that I can't do or I don't want to do, but I also want to pay attention to the skills that you need for that. So what were like the top three things that were really most important to you that you think people should be mindful of as they're recruiting for this role as they grow?
Well, I think the most important thing is having somebody that believes in your mission and your vision and what you're doing. That is absolutely the top thing. And if you're hiring a CEO, you have to trust that person the way you would trust like a life partner, like a husband or somebody in your life like that, because in the end, right, the CEO is the person that you're hiring that's the final decision maker, and a lot of times over the founder. So you have to be really clear that when you hire somebody to take that role, that they are taking the lead role in the company if they're really a true CEO. My experience was interesting because I opened my store in San Rafael, and a friend of mine, Keith Belling, who he's like started Pop Chips. One day he was like, "Hey, I really want you to meet this guy, Paul Coletta." And I was like, "Oh, okay." I was so busy. And so I went to the city and he introduced me to Paul. And I was like, "Oh, he's nice." He's like, "You guys are both Italian." And, he was working at like a grill, the Melt, that old grilled cheese company. Um, and he came out I remember like going to his office, and it was like this really fancy office in downtown San Francisco. And I was like kind of intimidated. I'm like, wow, this is like so fancy. They obviously had so much funding behind them and blah, blah, blah. And then he came to my store in San Rafael, and we had the funkiest office. We had like card tables for desks. And like I had, my son was probably like 1.5 or 2. And he was like, you know, running around all over the place. I mean, it was just really not a like professional environment. So I remember being really embarrassed. And then he loved the food and the juices. And then like once a week, he just kept coming, and he would be like, "Hey, I really crave this," or "God, I love what you're doing." And he would just sit and ask me a lot of questions. And I was like, this is interesting. Like what he's really hanging around here a lot. And then one day we were talking, it's like, you know what, I've just been thinking about it. Like, I really love what you're doing, and I really would like to be your CEO. And what do you think about it? And I remember, I was thinking, God, I don't know, because I was thinking, this is really my business. It's my baby. And, do I want to partner, in what I'm doing? And so it took me a while to like really get to the place where I was like, you know what, it's probably going to make my life really a lot easier. I had taken a small amount. I think at that point I'd raised like $1 million, which I thought was like so much money, which it is. But I mean, in the scheme of things, it's really not. And, but when I first took that $1 million, I was like, I'm never going to need any more money. Like, this is so exciting. I could build out my San Rafael kitchen. And then with that growth, and we outgrew that kitchen within 6 months, then I was like, oh my gosh, I do need more money, because I need to have another facility, and, blah, 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 the whole story. And so things were starting to get complicated. And I was like, oh, it's going to be so great. Yeah. Okay. Like, let's go. And I already had this trust with him because we'd known each other for a while now, and he asked all the right questions. And like I said, he was like, you will always be the decision maker when it comes to product, branding, we will work together as a team. And so we did for all of those years. And so I feel really lucky. I mean, I've had so many people come to me that I won't name their brands, but have come to me that have local businesses, women that are like, how did you find, like, I want a Paul. His name is Paul. And they, how did you get a Paul? Like, how did you find him? Like, I want a Paul. And I was like, it's just kind of destiny. Like, it just kind of happened in a really wonderful way. And I think it's not common, right? I think more than not, people are in a different situation where, you'll start something and you'll hire a CEO. And a lot of times the CEO's vision for a company can be a lot different than a founder's, right? Because they might be trying to get to profitability faster, or have pressure from the investors to have a certain amount of growth and a certain amount of time period, right? So,
or exit or get acquired, any of those things.
Totally. And so, so I just would say, if you're looking to hire people, like in a leadership role, that you just really need to make sure that they're aligned with your mission and your values and the way that you want to grow the company. And sometimes things come up and you might be wrong, right? You might think like, I want to grow the company in this way. And then all of a sudden, something you never dreamed of could come in front of you and there could be a different opportunity. And then being willing to pivot and being like, oh my God, I never thought of that. But like, and that's actually how the Whole Foods kiosk happened. Paul was on a bike ride with I can't remember his name, one of the heads of Whole Foods at that time in California. And he was like, hey, what if we like had a urban remedy kiosk in your one of your stores in Berkeley? And he was like, yeah, that could be cool. And they talked. And then he was like, I'm going to give you like 3 kiosks. And if you could do like $80 a day, it will work. And then we'll both make money and let's just see. And so we did the kiosk. I don't know if it was $80 a day. It might have been.
I know, just for conversation purposes.
Yeah. And so we did it and we did like, it was like $170 a day or something that we didn't expect. And then he was like, wow, this is like a huge success. Let's do it in Southern California. And I remember being like, people in Marin like know us just because we've started in Marin. We've been here for so long, and San Francisco. And I was like, I don't know how we're going to do. Like, people are very health conscious in LA, and really, there's zero brand awareness.
Huh? Isn't there more competition in LA? There's a lot more
competition. But we anyways, we did it and we launched. I think we started with like, I don't know, 8 or 10 kiosks, and it was so crazy because that really launched us in a different way because there was a lot more influencers there at that time. And so there was not a lot of other brands like us, especially in Whole Foods. And so I remember just being online and just being like, oh my gosh, like, this person is posting about us and that person is posting about us. And it happened very organically, which was so cool that a bunch of awareness came about, but it wasn't through like paid social media or anything like that. It was like people really liked the product and were excited to find this kind of a product in Whole Foods at that time. So we ended up opening stores in that area in Southern California as well when we had stores. And so sometimes things like that happen that you wouldn't even think of. And now that is our one channel that we're doing. So it was very unexpected.
Yeah. So that was a big decision. Was that scary when you made that decision to be like, okay, we're cutting the stores, we're doing this? Or was it just like a relief? You're like, wait, this is working. We're going to pare down.
It was both, honestly. It was both. I mean, because I was so attached because I was like, oh, I could go to my store in the city or I could go to my store in Mill Valley or whatever. And it was just so fun to have, and you have a different relationship with the customer. Like when you have a store, you can really have a different conversation with your customer because they come in and they're like, oh, this is my favorite, or I like this, or you hear their stories, right? Like I'd be in the store and people be like, my mom has breast cancer and this is the only food and juice she ate while she was doing her chemo. And then you're just like, oh my gosh, this is why we're doing what we're doing. This is exactly why I wanted to launch Urban Remedy. And so when it turned into really just the kiosk, you're not getting that direct feedback all the time, right? I mean, people write reviews, but it's just a different a way of communicating with the consumer or the customer. And so it was sad. So yes, it was a good idea and also sad because, then we were missing out on that kind of piece of the puzzle. But I think retail, especially right now, is just very difficult. It's like so hard. We were having trouble finding people to work the hours and, there's a lot of complexity with retail. And so it has made it a lot easier not having to, like if somebody doesn't show up for work, like with the kiosk, that kind of stuff doesn't matter. So it does make it easier.
Right. You don't need somebody to go open the door. And if they're sick and like 3 hours away, who's going to open the door? We need somebody to open the door.
Yes, exactly.
So now that you're in Whole Foods and Molly Stone's and a variety of other stores, what do you see for the next sort of 5 to 10 years?
I think we're really going to just continue to grow, into as many Whole Foods as we can. And so that we could, offer this food to as many people as we can. And, I think there's a constant evolution of what people want. And so it's just continuing to offer like the healthiest, most functional, using the most functional ingredients and just keeping our mission and our vision. and just expanding it and keep the consumer interested, right? Keep innovating new and exciting products. And I think, and I think that's where, also the challenge comes in. It's like really staying relevant and staying true to your mission and your values and not having people get like bored. Cause it's really interesting in the food space. If we look at trends a lot, and a lot of the times people will tell me a trend. They're like, oh, somebody that works for me might be like, oh, this is trending, so we should do it. And a lot of times I'm like, I don't care if that's trending. Like, if I don't believe in it and believe that it's like good for you and going to be like have those properties that I believe in, I'm like, I don't care. Like, I don't care if something's trending if it's not something that like I really believe in terms of like innovation, right? It's always interesting. But every year, you'll go to Expo and there's like everybody wants to know like what's the trend, and like sometimes it's like it's been like fermented food, or it's been whatever, which is great. But I'm always like trying to bring it back to like, yes, that might be a cool, interesting trend, but like, how does it fit into Urban Remedy? How does it fit into our mission and our values? And I want to continue to be a leader, not a follower, and so not turning into a brand that's trying to like keep up with every trend and like, then because I think that's kind of how you just jump the boat, right? You just kind of like try to be everything to everybody. And a trend is just a trend. But I believe what we're doing is based in something that's good for healing people and healing the planet. So we're always like organic, and we're always working with regenerative organic farmers, and we're sticking to those mission and values, which are really important to me, because those are things that are always going to be good for, like I said before, good when it's really good for you and you're eating seasonally and locally as much as you can. It's really good for the planet. And so just staying within those kind of guardrails is really important to me.
Awesome. Neka, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It's good to see you.
It's good to see you. It's a great conversation. I've learned so much, and I want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And if you guys have any more questions, shoot us a note or leave us a note on our social or on YouTube or wherever you listen or watch your podcast. But for those that are curious about learning more about Urban Remedy, Neka, what's the best way for them to dig in a little further?
You can go to urbanremedy.com is our website, and we have all of our locations listed there under locations. We also have Instagram, which is just Urban Remedy. LinkedIn, I believe, is just Urban Remedy. And we don't have YouTube like you. I think we might have a couple things on YouTube, but anyways, our website or Instagram are probably the best ways to learn more about Urban Remedy.
Awesome. So thank you again. Don't forget we will throw the links in the show notes for Neka and for Urban Remedy, so you can do that. And if you're not following us or watching us on YouTube, we are at Essential Ingredients. And if you want to tune in wherever you listen to podcasts, we're on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, etc. at Essential Ingredients with Justine. So thanks again for tuning in, and I want to thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
We get to expand our family each week with our new guests and our new friends that are tuning in and joining us for these conversations. Wow.